It happened so fast. 1 second, I was watching my daughter giggle from the porch as she tried to coax our dog into her lap. The next, a gun was pointed at her face. "Get that damn thing off my lawn." The voice cracked the quiet suburban air like a gunshot itself. I turned just in time to see her, Karen, HOA badge clipped to her pink vest like she was part of some official enforcement squad. Her hand shook, but the weapon she held? That wasn't shaking. That was aimed, directly, at my daughter. My legs moved before my brain did. "Hey!" I screamed, leaping over the steps. "Put that down. Are you out of your mind?" But Karen didn't flinch. "This is private property," she shrieked. "Your little cripple's been leaving marks on the sidewalk again with that chair. I warned you. I warned you." I could barely process the words coming out of her mouth. My daughter, my 9-year-old daughter, paralyzed from birth, had tears streaking down her face. She sat frozen, too shocked to cry, her little fingers gripping the armrest of her chair like it was the only thing tethering her to earth. I saw her lips move, but no sound came out. That's when I saw red. I dropped to my knees between them, my back to the barrel, arms spread like a human shield. "You pull that trigger," I said slowly, voice deadly calm, "and you'll regret it for the rest of your pathetic life." Karen's eyes twitched. Her lip curled. "I know my rights," she spat. "HOA gives me authority." I could feel my fists clenching, heart pounding, breath shortening, but I didn't move. Not yet. She wasn't just threatening my daughter. She was threatening the very air she breathed, and that's not something I tolerate. My wife came running from inside, screaming. Neighbors started emerging from behind curtains and doors. Cameras were recording now, phones held high. But even with half the street watching, Karen didn't back down. And just then, just before I moved to disarm her, her hand slipped. She fumbled. She realized she lost control of the moment. And that's when I stood up, slowly, straightened my spine, and took one deliberate step forward. Karen froze. Her gun lowered, barely. I leaned in and said it clear enough for every phone mic to pick it up. "You just aimed a loaded weapon at a disabled child in front of a combat veteran." Pause. Her eyes darted. And then I whispered, "What you didn't know is, I'm Delta Force trained." Before the madness, before the headlines, the courtroom appearances, the shaking of heads and shared whispers across fences, we were just a regular family chasing peace. My name's Nathan. I served 15 years in the military, most of that time spent in shadows with the Delta Force. Missions I can't talk about, scars I still carry, both visible and buried deep. When I left the service, all I wanted was normalcy. Nothing extravagant. Just a quiet cul-de-sac, a home with chipped paint and kids riding bikes out front, the smell of charcoal from weekend barbecues, and the sound of my daughter's laughter echoing through the hallway. And for a while, that's exactly what we had. My wife, Layla, a school nurse with the gentlest soul you'll ever meet, had always believed in small joys, family dinners, handwritten notes tucked into lunchboxes, a walk with the dog as the sun went down. And then there was Emily, our miracle. Born with a spinal cord defect that left her paralyzed from the waist down, she came into the world fighting harder than most grown men ever have. Doctors told us she might never smile, never speak, never connect. But Emily? She didn't just smile, she lit up rooms. She didn't just speak, she told stories. She didn't just connect, she changed people. Her presence had a way of softening even the hardest edges. She was 9 years old, full of mischief, wonder, and boundless kindness. She loved birds, cartoons from the 90s, and chocolate chip waffles. Our mornings began with her calling out, "Dad, you forgot the syrup," and ended with her asking questions like, "Do stars sleep?" while I tucked her in. We didn't see her wheelchair as a limitation. Neither did she. To us, it was just part of her story. And we made sure that story was one of empowerment, not pity. We moved into Sycamore Trails 3 years ago. It was one of those places the brochures call an ideal neighborhood for families, with pictures of happy kids running through sprinklers and perfectly pruned hedges. It was the kind of place where mailboxes were painted the same color, trash cans had designated hiding spots, and garage sales were community events complete with flyers and lemonade stands. The HOA was strict, sure, but we were told it was just to maintain order, a small price for harmony, as the welcome packet had said. In the beginning, I didn't mind the rules. No flags except American. Lawn must be cut weekly. Fences painted beige only. It was all so ordinary. After years of chaos overseas, that ordinariness felt like luxury. I used to sit on the porch with a cup of coffee, watching Emily feed the neighborhood cats while Layla read next to me. I'd smile and think, this is what I fought for. But peace, I've learned, is fragile, especially when people mistake control for order. It started small. At first, just glances. Karen, the HOA vice president who lived 2 houses down, had a way of looking at people like they were stains on a white couch. When we first moved in, she brought over cookies with a typed list of community expectations tucked neatly underneath the cling wrap. I know how hard it can be to adjust, she'd said with a stiff smile. We like things a certain way here. Layla thanked her, ever gracious. I just nodded. Something in me bristled, but I ignored it. After all, we weren't causing trouble. Emily's ramp was approved by the board. We followed every rule. Still, Karen would walk past our house and eye the wheelchair ramp like it offended her sense of symmetry. When Emily decorated it with flower lights during spring, a violation notice appeared in our mailbox. Exterior modifications must remain neutral, it read. No signature, but we knew. The real tension began when Emily started drawing with sidewalk chalk. Just harmless, colorful hearts and butterflies, sometimes a sun with our names scribbled beneath it. It brought her joy. It made the mailman smile. But one morning, we found a passive-aggressive note taped to our door. Please keep private expression within private spaces. Shared paths should remain clean and neutral. The paper wasn't signed, but it didn't need to be. Karen's scent of lavender perfume lingered on it. Layla was hurt. Emily asked if her art made people mad. I tried to reassure them both, but something in me tightened. In the field, we called this feeling the early tick, a sixth sense that trouble was stirring. I told myself I was imagining it. Karen became more emboldened over time. She started inspecting our front yard like a sergeant with a clipboard, sometimes making passive comments when Emily's medical van was parked in our driveway too long. Not exactly HOA friendly, that van, she once said, laughing dryly to another board member. I walked out and said nothing, but stared her down until she looked away. And still, we didn't report her. We just wanted to live, not fight. We wanted our daughter to feel safe. I remember the day Emily tried to give Karen a handmade card. It was a drawing of our block with little stick figures labeled Miss Karen, Mr. Nate, Mama, and me. Karen took one glance at it, forced a smile, and said, "That's sweet, honey, but be careful where you leave things. We don't want clutter." That night, Emily cried herself to sleep. I sat by her bed for hours, holding her hand, wondering how someone could see innocence and feel threatened by it. Still, we clung to the good. Our neighbors across the street, the Rodriguezes, were kind. They'd invite us over for cookouts, sometimes bringing Emily small puzzles or books. A few other families had expressed quiet disapproval of Karen's ways, but no one ever stood up to her. She had claws in everything: HOA budgets, security camera placements, landscaping decisions. People feared the fines, the inspections, the sudden appearance of citations. Karen thrived on fear, and she knew how to twist the rules like a blade. But I didn't fear her. I pitied her. I saw in her the kind of person who never experienced real danger, never held a dying man's hand, never saw what true injustice looks like. So she turned her suburban boredom into tyranny, weaponized politeness, camouflaged control. But as long as she didn't hurt my family, I chose to ignore it. I stayed silent. That was my mistake. Because silence, when dealing with people like Karen, is permission. And on that one terrible afternoon, she crossed a line she could never uncross. But before that, we were happy. We were whole. And we believed, naively, that the worst was behind us. It was a Saturday afternoon in early spring, the kind of day that makes you believe in fresh starts. The trees were budding, the breeze had a softness to it, and for the first time in weeks, Emily had convinced me to let her paint birdhouses on the front porch. She was so proud of her little project. Her fingers dappled in blue and yellow, a flower tucked behind her ear by Layla before she wheeled outside. Layla was inside on a call with her sister, and I was just a few feet away in the garage, sorting through boxes labeled old gear and tools I never use. The music playing from Emily's Bluetooth speaker was something cheerful. She'd been on a Disney throwback kick lately. Everything felt normal, safe. So I let my guard down. Emily had accidentally spilled a little cup of water near the walkway, which trickled down and left a small puddle by the edge of the sidewalk. It was nothing major, barely enough to soak a shoe. But apparently, that was all the excuse Karen needed. She came storming out of her house, clutching a manila folder and something tucked into her waistband. At first, I didn't even see the weapon. I saw her mouth moving, shouting something about violations and refusing to maintain safe conditions. I turned to respond calmly, thinking it was just another HOA tantrum. But when I looked back, I saw it. A gun. Not a holstered security weapon. Not a taser. A full-sized, black, semi-automatic pistol. Pointed not at me, but at my daughter. The folder slipped from her hand and fluttered to the ground like forgotten nonsense. Her finger hovered near the trigger. Emily had gone completely still, the paintbrush trembling in her hand. This is the final warning. Karen screamed, stepping up onto our driveway. That thing, she pointed to Emily's wheelchair, has left marks on my pavement again. You people think the rules don't apply to you. You people. The phrase hit me like a punch to the gut. I started walking fast, then running, yelling her name. Karen, put that down. But she didn't even look at me. Her eyes were locked on my daughter, wide and unhinged, like she was staring at some monstrous threat rather than a 9-year-old girl covered in glitter paint. I reached Emily just in time, dropped in front of her, arms wide. You point that thing again, I said, keeping my voice even, and I swear you'll regret it for the rest of your life. Karen's hands trembled now, whether from rage or realization, I didn't know. Her lips curled into a smirk. You think you're special? You think you can park your oversized medical van like it's a war zone? Well, not in my community. I run this block. I could hear Layla screaming behind us, the screen door slamming open, her feet hitting the pavement. Nathan, she shouted. She has a gun. Our neighbors had started peeking through their blinds. A couple across the street came onto their porch, phones already raised, recording. One of them gasped audibly, and I heard a voice say, "She's pointing it at the kid." Still, Karen didn't back down. She wasn't thinking like someone scared or sorry. She was thinking like someone who believed she was invincible. I'm licensed, she said, as if that made her threat reasonable. HOA security policy lets me carry on my own property. This isn't your property, I growled. It's ours, and you're threatening a disabled child. You're done, Karen. That's when her hand twitched, barely, but enough. She flinched like she was going to lower the gun, and in that split second, everything changed. I moved with precision, muscle memory from years of training kicking in. I stepped forward, swept her arm away, and with a quick motion had her disarmed. The gun slid across the pavement. She gasped and tried to slap me, but I didn't flinch. I stood tall, stepped between her and my daughter again, and stared into her hollow eyes. What you don't know, I said, voice low, is that I'm Delta Force trained. Karen stumbled backward, breath heaving, the twisted confidence draining from her face. Police sirens wailed in the distance. Layla had already called 911. By the time the cruiser pulled up, Karen was standing in the middle of the yard, arms folded, muttering about ungrateful people and fighting back against HOA crime. When the officers approached, she welcomed them like she was a hero reporting a burglary. She attacked me, she said, pointing at Emily. The officer blinked. The child in the wheelchair? Karen nodded emphatically. She was rolling toward me with something shiny. It could have been a weapon. I defended myself. That's when I realized we weren't just up against a rogue neighbor. We were up against someone completely detached from reality and backed by an HOA that had given her the illusion of unchecked power. And that day, That was just the beginning, because what she didn't expect was that I would fight back with everything I had, and I wouldn't stop until justice was done. The police left that afternoon without making an arrest. They took statements, asked questions, and despite the footage provided by neighbors clearly showing Karen drawing her weapon on a child in a wheelchair, they chose to file it as an ongoing neighborhood dispute, claiming they needed to consult with the HOA board and review context. Karen smiled the whole time. That fake, entitled smirk didn't waver once. She waved goodbye to the officers like they were old friends, then looked at me and mouthed, "You'll regret this." That night, Emily couldn't sleep. She kept asking if the bad lady was going to come back, if she was going to hurt her again. We assured her it was over. But deep down, I knew better. Because people like Karen, people who've built their entire identity on control and fake authority, they don't retreat. They escalate. And she did. First, the next morning, we woke up to find a citation duct taped to our door. Unauthorized front porch objects, violation of Article 3, Section B. Failure to comply within 24 hours will result in fines. It was addressed to our home, but no signature. A copy was also emailed from the HOA's automated system. The unauthorized object, Emily's wheelchair ramp, the same one approved 3 years ago when we moved in. I called the HOA's office line. No one answered. I emailed the board. Nothing. But an hour later, I received a notice. Due to safety concerns raised by multiple members of the community, your residence is now under HOA review. Safety concerns. Not about Karen's firearm, but about us. We weren't the threat. We were the problem in their eyes. I'd seen this playbook before, overseas, when corrupt locals tried to gaslight their victims and bury the truth under layers of bureaucracy. But this was happening in a quiet suburban neighborhood in America, not a war zone. Or so I thought. I spent the next few days documenting everything. I set up security cameras. I started compiling every email, every message, every verbal exchange into a timeline. I contacted a friend from my military days, now a civil rights attorney, and asked him to keep his phone on. But the war Karen launched wasn't just legal. It was psychological. The harassment came in waves. HOA board members started showing up at our door at random hours to inspect property lines. Anonymous notes were slipped into our mailbox. Maybe your daughter would be safer in a different neighborhood. One day, Emily's birdhouse project was smashed into pieces. Another day, someone poured gravel across our driveway ramp, making it impossible for her to wheel out safely. She cried every night, afraid to go outside. Layla broke down in the kitchen one morning and said she wanted to move. I held her and said nothing, because in that moment, I didn't know what to say. But I knew one thing: I wasn't running. I'd spent my life fighting tyrants. I wasn't going to let one wearing yoga pants and a fake badge win. Karen took her campaign public. She started a whisper network through the HOA newsletter, claiming we were destabilizing community peace, that we were filing false claims for sympathy. She questioned Emily's condition, claimed our daughter was being used as a political prop. The audacity of it shattered something inside me. I'd seen hate before, but this was something else, a petty, deep-seated venom rooted in fear, ignorance, and the hunger for power. What she didn't know was that I had seen worse. Much worse. And I wasn't afraid. So I started pushing back. I filed a formal complaint with the police department attaching all video evidence. I contacted disability rights organizations and sent them everything. I reached out to local journalists. At first, no one responded. But then one did. A small online outlet ran a piece titled, "Disabled Child Threatened by HOA VP Family Demands Answers." The article included screenshots, quotes from neighbors, and a clip of Karen holding the gun. It went viral overnight. And that's when the real backlash began. Not against her, but against us. We were suddenly flooded with threatening emails. Some called us liars. Others said we were destroying a peaceful neighborhood. One message said, "Veteran or not, you don't belong here." But some people started speaking out too, quietly. A woman down the street sent Layla a handwritten card saying, "We believe you." A teenager came by and offered to rebuild Emily's birdhouses. Still, fear was everywhere. Neighbors who once waved now avoided eye contact. The HOA board called an emergency meeting closed to the public. I showed up anyway. They tried to block me from entering. I reminded them I was a homeowner with rights. The tension was thick. Karen sat at the head of the table, smug and composed, as if she was presiding over a kingdom. I stood in front of them and spoke the truth, plainly, calmly, powerfully. I played the video. I read the threatening notes. I told them about the gravel, the smashed birdhouses, the terror in my daughter's voice every night. I ended with this. You allowed someone on this board to pull a gun on a disabled child. That's not HOA enforcement. That's domestic terrorism. The room was silent. Karen laughed. You think this is war? She said, her voice dripping with mockery. You want war, Mr. Soldier? Be careful what you wish for. From that day, she doubled down. She tried to get us evicted, filed fraudulent complaints with code enforcement, sent fake violation reports to our mortgage company. Layla's nursing job received anonymous calls claiming she was unstable. My military history was dragged through the mud in HOA chatter forums, questioning my mental fitness. But all of it backfired, because I wasn't alone anymore. That article had caught the attention of a larger publication. A news then showed up one afternoon and interviewed me right on the porch where it all started. I told them the truth, that we were a military family trying to live in peace, that our daughter deserved safety, that no HOA had the right to ignore abuse under the guise of policy. Emily sat beside me, holding my hand, and when they asked her how she felt about Karen, she simply said, "She made me afraid to smile, but I'm not afraid anymore." That clip aired on evening news, and everything changed. Suddenly, Karen wasn't untouchable anymore. A civil rights lawyer offered to represent us pro bono. The police department reopened the case. A state senator's office contacted me. The ADA Americans with Disabilities Act team launched an inquiry. Karen's background came under scrutiny. Her previous job history, a sealed restraining order from a different county, misuse of HOA funds. Slowly, the fortress she'd built started to crumble. But she didn't go down quietly. Oh no, she filed a restraining order against us, claiming emotional distress. She vandalized her own property and blamed us. She paid someone, a local teen, to file a false witness statement saying he saw Emily throw objects at her car. But the truth has a way of catching up, no matter how deep it's buried. That teen later came forward and confessed everything, and we had him on audio. The story exploded. National media picked it up, and while Karen still strutted around the neighborhood like she wore a crown, her kingdom was collapsing one lie at a time. One night, weeks into the storm, I stood outside under the stars, watching over Emily as she finally painted birdhouses again, this time with lights surrounding our porch, cameras installed on every corner. She smiled at me and asked, "Are the bad people gone?" I knelt beside her and said, "Almost, baby. They're losing now, because we didn't give up." And she nodded, dipped her brush in purple paint, and said, "Good, because I want to smile again." The storm finally broke when the footage aired on national television during a segment titled Neighborhood Justice Gone Wrong. It showed everything: Karen's gun, Emily's face frozen in fear, and my calm but firm stance as I defused the threat. Once the story hit major news outlets, there was no containing it. Public outrage exploded. Disability advocacy groups called for Karen's immediate arrest. Lawmakers issued statements. The ADA office moved fast. Karen was no longer a neighborhood queen, she was a national disgrace. Within days, our lawyer filed a civil suit against her and the HOA board for gross negligence, harassment, ADA violations, and intentional emotional distress. The demand letter alone sent shockwaves through the HOA. 3 board members resigned overnight. Karen, however, refused to budge. She filed counterclaims, accused us of media manipulation, claimed we staged the entire thing for fame, but her lies were crumbling fast. Her firearm? Illegally owned. Her HOA authority? Grossly overstepped. Her previous restraining order from a different neighborhood? Unsealed and damning. The judge presiding over our civil case didn't need much convincing. The ADA filed an amicus brief. Multiple neighbors testified in our favor. One even confessed they'd been afraid of Karen for years. The prosecutor in the criminal case brought charges: child endangerment, brandishing a firearm in a threatening manner, and reckless conduct with a deadly weapon. Karen arrived in court wearing that same smug expression, as if this was just another HOA meeting she could dominate. But this time, she wasn't in charge, and I wasn't alone. I sat in that courtroom in full suit, medals pinned to my chest by request of my attorney, a silent reminder of who I was, and who she had underestimated. Layla held Emily's hand while she clutched a little purple birdhouse as if it were armor. The court listened to the 911 call, watched the video, and reviewed every citation, every false complaint, every ounce of petty tyranny Karen had piled on us over the past year. When Emily took the stand, nervous, soft-spoken, but brave, there wasn't a dry eye in the room. She told me I didn't belong here, she said. She looked at me like I was broken, but I'm not. I just want to feel safe in my own house. That was the moment the tide crashed. Karen's attorney fumbled. The jury watched her unravel. The judge declared her a danger to the community. Not only did she lose the case, she was sentenced to 18 months in jail with mandatory psychological evaluation. The HOA was ordered to pay restitution and reorganize under external oversight. Our family received damages, public apologies, and the legal right to remain in our home without further interference. But more than that, we got peace. Real peace. Karen's downfall became a cautionary tale across HOA networks nationwide. Other families from other states began sharing their horror stories. Advocacy groups rallied. The news kept covering the story not just as a local scandal, but as a larger issue. When does community enforcement become abuse? I was invited to speak on a panel about veteran reintegration and disability rights. Layla was asked to share our journey in a healthcare policy summit. And Emily, our brave, brilliant daughter, was honored by a nonprofit that built accessible playgrounds in underserved communities. She smiled again, laughed again, painted again, and I made sure no one would ever rob her of that light again. The legal fallout shook sycamore trails. Karen's home was seized to cover court-ordered payments. The new HOA board apologized publicly and rewrote their entire community charter with legal guidance. They even named a local park bench in honor of Emily's courage. Some people moved out. Others finally exhaled. The neighborhood began to heal. I stood on our porch a week after the court decision, watching Emily roll down the now smooth, flower-lined ramp, and thought to myself, we survived the war at home. Not with fists, not with fear, but with truth, strength, and relentless love. In the weeks that followed the final court ruling, our lives began to slowly rebuild, not as if nothing had happened, but with the weight of what we'd survived firmly acknowledged and respected. Emily started sleeping through the night again. No more waking up in tears, no more asking if the bad lady was outside, no more needing to check the cameras every hour just to feel safe. We took things slow. Healing isn't instant, not for a child who was once at the wrong end of the gun, not for parents who nearly lost the one thing they'd give everything to protect. But something beautiful began to bloom from the wreckage. The porch became a place of joy again. Emily and I painted over the chipped wood together, layer by layer, turning it into a mural of bright colors and birds and hope. We turned the site of trauma into a canvas of resilience. Layla planted sunflowers along the walkway, and Emily called them her guardians. That summer, we hosted a small neighborhood barbecue, something we hadn't done since the nightmare began. And this time, people came. Real neighbors. Good people. They brought covered dishes and folding chairs and quiet apologies. Some hugged us. Others just looked us in the eye and nodded silent acknowledgments of their regret for not speaking up sooner. We accepted it all, not because we had to, but because holding on to bitterness was Karen's legacy, not ours. Emily's birdhouses came back in full force. With community support, she even sold some online to raise money for wheelchair accessible park equipment in other neighborhoods. Her story reached people far beyond our little block. A children's author reached out and asked if she could base a character on Emily, a brave, artistic girl who stands up to bullies with color instead of violence. Emily smiled shyly and said yes. And in that smile, I saw the most powerful act of defiance imaginable, choosing joy after being broken. As for me, I began speaking publicly, something I'd never done in all my years of service. I talked about veterans who returned to find battles waiting for them in their own backyards. I talked about protecting the vulnerable, about the silent wars fought by parents, and about the need for legislation that holds neighborhood authorities accountable when they abuse power. People listened, politicians took notes, and a bill named Emily's Law was proposed in our state, legislation aimed at ensuring stricter oversight of HOAs, requiring mental health screenings for board members who carry weapons, and mandating disability sensitivity training. Karen? She disappeared into the shadows. Her name was stripped from HOA records. Her mugshot made rounds on every news site that once refused to cover the story. And while I won't pretend I didn't feel satisfaction watching justice catch up to her, I can tell you with certainty that we didn't do this for revenge. We did it to reclaim our peace, to prove that fear only wins when good people go silent. And we refuse to stay silent. There are still scars, of course. Emily flinches at sudden loud noises. Layla checks the front camera more often than she used to. I still wake up sometimes at 3 a.m., breath caught in my throat, remembering the cold steel of Karen's pistol aimed at my baby girl. But we've learned to live with those scars. We've turned them into reminders of how strong we are, how far we've come, and what we'll never allow again. We are not the same family that moved into Sycamore Trails looking for peace. We are stronger now, wiser, fiercely protective of each other and of those who can't protect themselves. The porch where a gun was drawn is now the place where Emily reads her stories aloud. The sidewalk she once feared is now chalked with rainbows and birds, and her favorite quote, "Be brave anyway." Because in the end, that's what this story is about: not fear, not hate, not HOA politics, but courage. The kind that rises when you have every reason to give up, but don't. If you're still here, if you've stayed through every moment of our story, then maybe you understand something deeper than outrage. Maybe you understand what it means to be pushed too far, to fight not just for your rights, but for the quiet dignity of a life free from fear. We didn't share this story for sympathy. We didn't put our pain on display to go viral. We told it because silence breeds monsters. Because if this can happen in a peaceful neighborhood to a disabled child whose only crime was painting birdhouses, it can happen anywhere. And it is happening, right now, to families too scared to speak, to parents who think the system will protect them, to children who are taught to shrink instead of shine. But it doesn't have to stay that way. You don't need to be Delta Force trained to stand up. You don't need a courtroom to find your voice. What you need is courage. Courage to ask hard questions. Courage to document the truth. Courage to call out abuse, even when it's dressed in a name badge and backed by a clipboard. We won because we didn't let fear write our ending. We didn't let Karen be the last chapter. And if you're watching this and facing your own version of her, maybe a neighbor, a boss, a school administrator, or even a faceless institution, I want to tell you something I told my daughter that night after the courtroom fell silent. I told her the world will always have people who try to make you feel small, but the moment you choose to stand up, you make them smaller than their own lies. That's what this story is. It's not about revenge. It's not about violence. It's about choosing to fight back with truth, with grace, and with unshakable resolve. And now it's your turn. If this story moved you, if it stirred something inside you, don't let it end here. Share it. Comment your own story. Speak up for someone who can't. Because every voice matters. And every Karen who thinks they can rule through fear needs to hear them. My name is Nathan. I'm a father, a veteran, and now, whether I wanted to be or not, a fighter for justice in suburbia. You've just heard our story. Now, help make sure the next one ends better. hit that subscribe button, share this video, and join us here on the HOA Stories, where we tell the stories the gatekeepers don't want you to hear. Because no one gets to terrorize a child and walk away. Not in our neighborhood. Not ever again.